Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Neiberg here with the International Society for First World War Studies, and it is my absolute pleasure to finally, through technological challenges, be here with Dominique Reill at the University of Miami down in Florida. Dominique, please tell us briefly about yourself and your research interests.
So I'm at the University of Miami, as you just said. I'm an associate professor, soon to be full, hopefully, as long as nothing goes wrong. And my research interest started out when I was in grad school thinking about Italy, and then I met István Deák, and that changed everything. And so I got pulled into the Habsburg world. And from then on, I just started moving more Balkan. So I guess I go where I feel curiosity, and curiosity has led me further east and further Habsburg.
So tell us a bit about how curiosity brought you to the book we're talking about now and to the story of Fiume after the end of the First World War.
Well, I mean, every book usually starts from the book before, and in a way that's true with this one too. I did spend a lot of time in the region working on the first book, which was about the 19th century, but it actually was triggered by negotiating with my publisher around images. I had written a book that I really loved and they were happy to publish, but it was never going to make any money. And so they said, well, we'll give you some images, but we're not going to give you what you want. If you want images, you need to write about something someone wants to read about. And so after, I got a lot more than they promised, I thought about what were things that were considered quote unquote important that really I didn't think were being done right, or that actually, to be honest, made me angry. And the story of D'Annunzio and proto-fascism was the first thing that came to my mind, and I even stopped thinking about moving anywhere forward. I realized that since I was a grad student, I never really understood why this story has been so monolithic with very few differences. And anything that you know about the Balkan Italian historiography, usually they all disagree. So it's very strange when a story is so it has one voice. So that's why I decided to do this one.
So tell us the title, publisher.
So it's called The Fiume Crisis, A Life in the Wake of the Habsburg Monarchy, and it came out with Harvard Belknap Press last year, December 2020, for the centennial of the Christmas of Blood. Gabriele D'Annunzio was this flamboyant poet in the 1890s and 1900s and became this poet soldier during World War I, named it that. And in his typical style, what he named was not what happened. There was very little blood, but it did happen at Christmas, so at least it was more or less. So my book kind of takes the story of this famous guy who led what they considered the first version of charismatic fascism against the state in 1919. It takes it and it kind of flips it and looks at where did they go and what happened there, and why are they, the place and the people, not part of the story, and just the man and his followers are.
So your book has convinced me to stop using Silesia and some other places in Europe as an example of the complicated nature of geography at the end of the World War I, and to instead use Fiume, which is the town itself is predominantly Italian. The hinterland is predominantly Slovenian and Croatian. The economic links are back to Vienna. This very, very complicated story in this very, very, very small place.
Oh, but I mean, Silesia, I can't get enough of Silesia either. Let's do it all together. I think that hotspot places, people raise interesting questions, like all of a sudden everything you want to know about Budweiser, so you start studying and then it becomes too much about one place. I think what we need to try and do is make sure that we do more places together. So I hope Fiume buddies up with Silesia. Because geography does matter, but it doesn't matter in a very circumscribed geographical way. So I find like Silesian studies and Fiume fit so well together. We got to stick together, we Silesians and I.
All right. So you said that you wrote this book because you actually you were not comfortable with the consensus around the historiography on this. So briefly tell us what your book does then to break that consensus.
Instead of trying to understand what happened after, which I think is the majority of what the works that have looked at Fiume does, they try and understand how did fascism happen, right? Why does it happen so fast in Italy? And so they think about the war, because the war has just happened, and they look at all of these first fighters, most of whom were veterans or soldiers, and then they kind of make Fiume be the origin story of the leader and the paramilitary troops. And then they see this, it's like, ooh, this is a lot like Mussolini on the balcony. And a lot of the guys are the same guys. So it's not a completely illogical turn. The problem is that a lot of what happened in 1919, 1920 was more press and media than it was what actually happened. And so what I did is I moved away from media. I actually tried to use the newspapers as little as possible, and I tried to do a sociological history. So really like looking at, well, how did everyday life work and not work? In many ways throughout all of Europe, 1919 didn't work that well. But people did survive, and actually, strangely enough, for a history of fascism, the Fiume story is not a very violent one. So I also tried to remind us all, there's a lot of violence going on in 1919. Are we really going to choose one of the least violent places as the birth story of fascism? And what does that mean? So that's I think what I tried to do.
Yeah, and I think you did that brilliantly. So also taking Fiume as the not the beginning point or even the end point of a story, but the middle point of a story, really, of the way that this port city is built up throughout the Habsburg Empire, and the way that it becomes this symbol, remains, I guess, for many people, this symbol of the disastrous world that gets created in 1919.
Yeah, I mean, it was really hard to do because in the archive, so another thing I did a little differently is I used different archives. It's a typical historian's trick, right? What if you change the archives up? So in this one, I used the city archives, which had been basically underutilized, partially because of, the divisions between Yugoslavia and Italy, but mostly because the archives had been moved or stolen, depending on who you ask, when Fiume Rijeka had been incorporated into Italy in 1924. So a lot of historians, not just Italian, but American, German, Austrian, French, had gone to the archives of the city that had been moved to Italy. But they didn't, and that looks like a full archive, but they didn't think to look at the city itself. So what's in the Italian archives is everything that relates to Italy. And what's in the city archive is like, how does plumbing work? What happened at the school council? How is the port being? So if you look at an archive that's about Italy, then the story will be about Italy. Sure. And if you look at archives that are about how do we survive, a lot of what you're going to get is how do we survive. So I tried to put more emphasis on this underutilized source.
This is a lesson I learned from your current department chair, Mary Linda. Types are the key to all of this, which ones you go to, how you explore them, and how you use them. Well, I don't want to end this quick conversation without making 2 points. The first is that your Zoom background is far nicer than mine is. And second, whenever I talk to a scholar, especially ones that I admire as much as I admire your work, I always have to ask the question, what are you doing next?
Well, I'm in love with my next project. The Fiume story was one about fixing a historiography that made me angry, and this is a project that isn't about anger. It's actually about, I don't know yet what my emotion is about it, but the working title is The Habsburg Mayor of New York, and it's about Fiorello LaGuardia. He actually lived in the Habsburg lands from when he was about 15 and a half to when he was 24. And he was not a rich man, he was not a networked man, he was not an educated man. I mean, he was self-taught. And he basically learned how to be a man in Habsburg cities, Trieste, Fiume Rijeka, Budapest, Zagreb. And so what I'm trying to do is look at how much did he learn from looking at urban developments around immigration and city planning in a much more welfare state, which was the Habsburg Empire, than New York City was at the time. And how much does this explain how we got this Republican progressive mayor who is so focused on immigration, housing, parks, transportation. So I'm trying to see how much this is telling a story about these worlds weren't as separate, and the new world was maybe a little older than the old one.
Great. Well, I can't wait to read that. I tell folks all the time, Fiorello LaGuardia is one of those figures you've got to study if you want to understand 20th century America. So understanding his background will be just critically important.
Dominique, and I'm going to try, I know we have to get off, I'm going to try and say that understanding early 20th century Habsburg Europe, one could do best through looking at LaGuardia.
Yeah. If only he had a nicer airport named after him. That's one of my
Hey, they just renovated.
better. Dominique, thanks so much. I look forward to reading the book. Thanks for taking the time. And hopefully when the plague is gone, we can get together in person and talk about these things.
Absolutely. I can't wait.